Hi, everyone. My name is Martin Svensson. I'm Managing Director at AI Sweden. Very happy to welcome you all to this seminar this afternoon that we arranged together with the Swedish Energy Agency, Vinnova, the Swedish National Space Agency, Formas, and with a lot of participants, both online and also here physically. So, warm welcome to this afternoon. And with that, I hand over to our moderator of the day, Paulina.
Thank you so much, Martin. And a warm welcome to all of you from me as well. I have the huge honor of being today's moderator, guide, what have you. And this is a special treat that we have for you, those of you who are following this event virtually. So we have about 20 minutes where you will get the opportunity to meet 3 of the projects that have been part of one of the calls. The call has the same name as this event, so AI in the service of climate. And you will get to meet them one by one and get a short presentation, and I'll ask some questions as well. And before we start, I just want to encourage you eventually to interact with us. It's super important, especially with a digital audience, that we interact. So eventually you will get the information that you need to use Mentimeter to interact with today's speakers. But that's for later. Now, I have the huge honor of presenting the first project to you. We have with us here today Marcus Ekelund from the project that's called ICA, which stands for AI-powered carbon border adjustment. And Marcus is here to tell us more about what that actually means. So a warm welcome to Marcus. Yes. Just in time, no stress.
No, that's perfect. Oh, where do you want me?
Front? Actually, we can switch places.
Oh, great.
Yep. So
yes, take the scene. Yeah. Great to have this opportunity. Marcus Ekelund from 2050, CEO there. We work for good business on a flourishing planet. And we always been anxious about the scope 3 emissions. What happens back in the value chain? And one way of solving the climate issue is, of course, global carbon pricing, but that will take quite a while to get there. And when we applied for this project, there was a discussion about carbon border adjustment mechanisms, but the main argument against was it's too hard to do the calculations. And that's where we thought maybe AI can help here. So we started the project with that, and we looked into can AI help us calculate? Answer is yes, clearly. It's good enough. You get a good value. You know where the resource is. Is it legitimate enough so that you can put the money on it? Yes, you can do it legitimate enough. You can trace it back. So everyone would agree, from all stakeholders that we interviewed, from the companies to the governments, and all parties say, yes, that would be enough. But there is a little bit of if here, and that is the data, where to get the data from. And that's where we had huge problems, because the data is hidden in the value chain, in the companies, and they are not too willing to share that. So AI can help with make estimates, and they can help. Is this a reasonable value or not? But we need the data to make some sort of calculation.
And for some people who are sort of just getting into working with AI, maybe not fully inserted into the obstacles, but also the possibilities, we tend to mention data as one of the main hurdles. Like you need data, you need good data, etc. So can we dive deeper into what specific type of data issues did you have? I know you mentioned when we pre-talked that the data was either too sort of common or too specific for certain contexts or companies. What does that mean for those who are new to this?
It's a domain problem, basically. But when you look at LCA and carbon accounting, there are 2 different kinds, as you say. There are some deep dives, life cycle assessments that look very particularly into this particular product and how did they manufacture it, where did it come from, where did the metals come from. And that's very, very specific and can give a quite good estimate on exactly how much carbon was emitted to produce that one. But it's hard to use that on the next one because it's so specific. And then we have a lot of general averages on emissions that on an average level it works quite fine, but it's hard to make some measures and do reducing emitting activities based on that.
Is that EU data, or where do you actually get that data from?
No, it's not EU data. It's hidden in databases that some of them are open,
Yeah.
and some are closed that you need to subscribe to or pay for.
Mm. So what was this like? Where did this take you? Did you actually have to sort of quit the project earlier because you couldn't finish it, or how big of a problem is this?
We haven't finished, but we had to reframe it all the time, depending on
Pivot a little
exactly
bit.
pivot a little bit. So what could be very useful is now EU has forgot to mention, but now carbon border adjustment mechanism is here, and the first required reporting was actually last January. So a lot of companies have already made a first report.
So January 31st
Yes.
was the deadline.
Yes, a week ago.
Yeah.
And we helped some companies with that. But EU has chosen, based on this problem, they have chosen a quite narrow view on what emissions are. So they are asking for really like small projects and make an estimate. But the problem with that is that will not lower the emissions, but at least we put a price on it. So it's a good start. But what AI could help with is to analyze this. If we could get the suppliers out there to actually add in some data and add in some more details about how they produce, and that thereby getting more benefits from a lower carbon border adjustment mechanism, AI could help with validate that and easily find outliers that this is not reasonable, this you should look into. And EU has already said that, yes, we will look into and have stick pro
Sample.
Yes, sample tests, but with AI they could do that in much better way, and that is where AI is today. So that would be quite easy to use models like we produce within the project.
Exciting. So we have to move on to the next project, but just as a conclusion, what do you wish you had known when you first started this project, or when you applied for the money?
When we started, we had a huge challenge to get the right competence aboard, and we also underestimated the challenge to combine domain knowledge with AI knowledge. That we should have spent a lot more time on that. Who is responsible to get this together? Because now we had like too much of two silos, even though we tried a lot.
Great insight. So those of you who are thinking of actually applying for one of the calls in the future,
yes,
you can reach out to
definitely
as well.
I'm happy to help. Yeah.
Yes. Great. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you. And so we're moving on to the next project, which is Decab on Alte, I think it's pronounced. We have Bernd Ketzler here, and he's here to explain more what this project is about. It's all about digital twins and large-scale simulations, basically. So welcome.
Thank you, Paulina. Great to be here. Just quick, it's decarbonate.
Oh.
A clever thing with AI in there. So
yes.
Decarbonate.
Oh, it's an I.
Yeah.
I missed that.
Yeah.
That makes so much more sense. I should have realized.
Yeah, as you said, decarbonate is about renovation on a large scale.
Yep.
It's about the decarbonization of the existing building stock. So we're talking about buildings that already exist for a long time, where we don't have the data, where we don't have all the information. And here, the problem right now is actually that it takes a lot of time, a lot of manual input actually to get that data. So it makes it tough to do analysis and decision-making on a large scale. And we in this project combine two exciting technologies. The one is digital twins, and then, of course, AI.
And for those who don't know what a digital twin is.
Digital twin is a digital copy of something physical. In this case, it's a building. And in these digital twins, we can then store a lot of valuable information. For example, the geometries, the location, etc. But we also, of course, need for the energy modeling, for the simulations, we need a lot of other information. And that includes then, for example, how many windows a building has, or how large the windows are. And here we use our algorithms to detect, for example, the number of windows. Then on top of that, we use a clusterization approach to basically go through various databases to then get additional information, for example, about the U value, how the thickness of the wall, etc. And that feeds into the simulation, and then we can optimize for LCA and LCC, life cycle costing, life cycle assessment. And hopefully at the end of the project, we will get a prototype for a decision support tool that then can support the owners of buildings, but also energy providers, maybe even city decision makers to do renovation analysis and planning on a large scale.
And just so the audience understands the scale of this, nowadays we can handle and process so much data that we can create digital twins of whole cities, which Gothenburg is striving to do, right?
Yeah, of course. Even entire countries, even in the entire world.
Okay.
So it is possible to go from a single building to a neighborhood and to then the entire world eventually.
The planet, which we need.
Yeah.
Yes. So you listened to my interview with Marcus and the challenges that they had. Data. Has that been a problem for you too? I know you have a lot of partners, stakeholders in this project. So I guess sort of getting everyone together, collaborate, communicate has been a challenge too. What has it been like?
Yeah, I mean, the collaboration is good and we get the data that we need, but of course, we have a problem with the quality of the data often. And the most valuable data for us, for the energy simulation, is often the one that is the hardest to get. So really trying to sort of collect data from different sources, databases, from Landmäteriet, from Boverket, is a bit of a challenge when it's incomplete or has lower quality. So I would say, yeah, data definitely the biggest challenge.
So what do you do when that happens?
Yeah, I mean, there's different approaches one can take. As I mentioned, the clusterization approach technique to basically try to match different data sets and find the truth in that is a way forward. But ideally, of course, we would like to work with better data to begin with. But it's not a it's more a wish than a reality.
Yeah. And so finally, what's in the pipeline? The future plans?
Yeah, I think digital twin as a platform really offers like really interesting possibilities to pivot and to include different kinds of modeling. The indoor, we can also include cooling, currently mostly working with heating. But even sort of a new pipeline going from like 2D drawings of buildings that are 100 years old, include image data, include GIS data, and then maybe eventually get a BIM model out of it, a building information model, that can then help us with circular approaches, with new business models would be a very interesting case.
So there are a lot of applications that are possible, at least.
Absolutely.
Exciting. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you,
and good luck with everything.
Thank you.
So, and last but not least, now we're moving over to kettle, to cows. I love the spectrum of different AI projects that we're seeing here. So here to present the next project is Berenice Godino. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So can you do, I already hinted the cow part, but can you sort of explain the technology behind this?
Yeah, we are trying to use AI as base to increase the yield and the quality of the algae. It's a microalgae called asparagus. And yeah, and because we want to do it in a larger scale, because we want to combat climate change. And the reason behind is because if you give this seaweed to cows, that can reduce the methane emissions in 80%. So this is a motivation.
So you feed the cows with these very specific algae.
Yeah, as a supplement.
Yes, as a supplement. And that reduces the methane emissions with 80%.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So what role does AI play in all of this?
Well, we have this company that is Volta Green Tech, and they have some facilities. They were in lab scale. So because they wanted to scale up, they need to understand very well how is the process of the algae growing. So they gather data, and then we use this data to create some AI models, trying to predict what are the best initial cultivation parameters to produce good algae at the end. And also we tried to do some analysis between the cultivation parameters and trying to find some similarities or some relationships with them, because that can help us to understand how to add nutrients, how to forecast the biomass of the algae.
Have you collaborated with any other partners in this? And where, so can you relate to the data issues or the AI talent issues that we've talked about here?
Yeah. It was a real challenge, but very interesting project, because it was 5 companies involved. It was this Volta Green Tech, it was IBL, SLU, Trebonder, and us, Chalmers Industry Technique. Each one of us expert in different domains. So of course, at the beginning, it was a challenge just to have a common understanding in each one of these domains, and just a lot of meetings and workshops trying to understand how each one of us had a purpose into the project, and we needed to collaborate with the rest of the companies just to achieve that. So of course, we find problems first in understanding, but it's just about communicate with them, and also what kind of data we needed. We needed to establish, okay, we need this kind of data, and that is the reason, because this is the modeling that we are trying to do, and they need to understand that. But also we need to understand how they are planning to do the experiments, and to think if from those experiments we actually can get the data we need. So yeah, but it's a lot about communication.
And where are you now? Is it still in a very sort of clear experiment lab setting, or are you actually producing more sort of sustainable meat already?
Yeah. Volta Green Tech already have some facilities, bigger ones, and they are starting to have the setup just to scale up. So they try to use all the learnings we had during the project and try to apply all these learnings in the new facilities.
That's super exciting.
Yeah.
Anything else sort of looking forward? Is this project done now, or do you still have activities planned?
No, this project is done. We finished in December last year. Yeah.
Any plans sort of in another setting moving forward?
Not for the moment.
No.
Yeah.
But you've come a long way.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for I think this is so amazing that we can look at whole cities and we can use AI in cow settings with Kettle. The diversity of projects is amazing. So thank you for joining us today.
Yeah.
Thank you. So now you've been introduced to 3 of the projects that are here today, some glimpses into the ways in which AI hands-on can be used for a greener future and more sustainable future. We'll be back in a couple of minutes, actually in about 12 minutes at 1 o'clock with the main program. So have some coffee or anything else that you need to do, send some emails, but be back at 1 o'clock the latest. Thank you for now. Hi, everyone, and a warm welcome to this very both interesting and very important event. And this is a hybrid event. We now, for those of you who are online, we did a special feature for you a couple of minutes ago, but now we also have a physical in-room audience here with us. So we have a digital audience coming at us from LinkedIn and YouTube. A warm welcome to those of you who are new. And we also have an audience here. And just as an opening sort of statement from me, my name is Paulina Modlitba. For those of you who don't know me, I have the huge honor of being the moderator. I am an engineer, tech nerd who have been working with innovation and not specifically sustainability, but it has always been an important part of what I do. So I have my own business and been running it for 10 years, but I also love to meet people, to share knowledge, to learn, etc. So I'm super excited to be part of this. And for many years, I've always also been a reviewer of many of Vinnova sort of innovation and AI related calls, which is another thing that I really love doing. Being sort of seeing what's going on in the forefront of innovation, and especially now sustainability and AI, of course, in a lovely combination. It's probably not news to you that sustainability, climate crisis is, of course, one of our main, if not the main challenge that we have as human beings. And AI is probably one of the most important tools that we have to tackle these challenges. So combining the two and sort of looking into what's in the intersection, what the magic that can be done in the intersection of climate challenges and AI is, of course, key. And that's why we're here today. And as background, there have been 2 calls, I think, if I remember correctly, that Vinnova, Formas, and the Swedish Energy Agency have done jointly to push the climate innovation merge with AI sort of field forward. And now, as a part of that, as a sort of natural extension of that, we're having this event with the same type of topic. So the role of AI in solving the climate crisis. I should also mention that there's a report with the same name that was published in 2021. And the reason why I mention it is it's still sort of read-worthy and interesting and insightful, of course. But we will also reference to it, I think, at least once in this program. Another thing, sort of practical thing, is that we love interaction. I love interaction as a moderator. So we want you to ask questions. We won't have time for all of the questions if you have many, but I'll make sure to make some space for questions for the speakers. And especially for those of you who are following this event virtually, please use Mentimeter for asking questions. You can just copy this or take a photo of this QR code and it will take you to the Menti that presentation that we're using. You can also, if the QR code is not working, you can use the 8, I think, digit code at the bottom right of this slide. And there will be 3 slides in Mentimeter, and you don't have to worry about sort of when to fill in what. We'll make sure that you're actually using the right Q&A sort of survey at the right time. So that's it. Any questions so far? No? It's pretty clear. Now let's move over to today's first speaker. He will, of course, present sort of the larger picture of this. Mark Bjuder is the CTO and co-founder of Futurity Systems Barcelona. So he has the futurist perspective on these issues that we're focusing on today. He has a broad perspective of working and sort of being involved in projects both in Sweden, in Silicon Valley, the Bay Area, but also right now in Barcelona. So he will make sure that we'll get sort of glimpses into and a comparison of these different markets and areas. So a round of applause for Mark.
Thanks, Paulina. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, actually, I used to live on Bollnegatan, like right across the street. So it was a long time ago, but I love coming back to Sweden. And so thank you very much for having me, Vinnova. I want to start out, by the way, by handing out some reading material, some magazines. I'll just give one of these to each side. You can pass it around. I won't mind if you're distracted, because you might need it. I'll explain in a little bit what that is. So we got this. So AI and the surface of climate. These are obviously two massive transformations that are going on all across the society, the economy, even civilization scale changes, you could argue. So it's pretty amazing to have a group like this all together to spend some time talking about it, because I think it's probably the best opportunity for us to change the world in a better way that things like social media and other stuff that they think are going to change the world never could. So how many of you feel climate doom? How many of you would say it's just downhill from here? Okay, that's more than I thought. How many of you are just like slightly pessimistic? Okay, anybody optimistic? Great. Okay. All right. So there's going to be a cage match later, and whoever survives can go home. I've worked in this space for about 10 years. I came in it as a investor analyst looking at deep tech startups, so companies trying to invent a new enzyme that could convert biomass into sustainable fuels or renewable polymers or things like that. At the time, there was a lot of early stage optimism. There was still the idea behind the inconvenient truth and global warming was starting to spread, but there still wasn't this pessimism, which I feel like is reaching a crescendo level, and it's really not warranted. I mean, it's important. I mean, we tend to focus on things and then get them done when we're afraid of them. But if you look at like the worst case scientific projections about climate, I mean, it's bad. But it's not an extinction event. It's not even hundreds of millions of people dying and things like that. So there's room for optimism. But if we just leave that up to somebody else, then that won't happen either. So there's this weird kind of double balance that we have to strike. And the magazine that you're seeing is basically one of our efforts to do that. So it's a positive magazine about the future. You'll see one of them set in 2030, one set in 2043. And it's just like, Monocle or Vanity Fair. It's sort of people are still going to think celebrities are amazing. They're still going to buy, skincare products, and they're still going to, go on vacation places. And so this is just a reminder that that possibility also exists. So one of them is about tourism into space, which a lot of companies are trying to achieve in the next 5 or 10 years. The other one is about longevity. And it's about like 70-year-olds thriving and living like 30-year-olds in 2043. Which after we wrote, we realized, well, that's actually us, because we'll be in our 70s in the 2040s. So I like to compare this to when I and a lot of us were growing up, and nuclear war and winter were the existential crises that we faced at the time. And those didn't just go away, but they didn't happen either. There's still threats that we need to be concerned about, but they're not our top of mind threats. Right? So we can look at times that we have overcome worries in the past, like overpopulation and starvation. Now our problem is not starvation; it's obesity. Right? We can look at a lot of the problems we've solved and say, are there lessons from that we can apply to climate? And one of the key ones is technology. So that's why the AI combination is really good. Here's your magazine. So it will all be fine. I'll come with a bra. I'll come back to that in a little bit. So again, a really brief intro to me, not because it's all that important, but because I'm going to use a lot of examples from my personal and professional experience. Again, not because I have had, I think, a lot of fun and exciting experiences, but all of us have examples that we can look back on and say, oh yeah, that was actually the precursor to this. And since we're talking about the future, what I want us to do is go through some examples of things that are coming out today that you may or may not have heard of, but they're there, and you can buy them, taste them, drive them, and let's start to project forward. What does that look like? As much as we look back, let's start looking forward and seeing how those apply. So, as I said, I lived here in Sweden, mostly in the 90s. I was first a student, and then I worked at Accenture, big management consulting company, and then at Icon Media Lab. How many of you remember Icon Media Lab? Yeah, okay. So I was like employee number something, double digits, but still early. And I saw this huge transformation in Sweden and also later, in the world. And that is where in Sweden, it was very like getting a job as an entrepreneur was like, are you cheating on your taxes. Like, why would you do that? It was not it was not something that Sweden really embraced. You should be an engineer, go work at Ericsson, or in the government, ABB, something like that. And this culture of let's rent some empty space, let's invent something, let's get made fun of in the newspapers for having big ideas and stuff like that. That became normalized. I mean, it really became part of young people's Swedish culture. And again, now we're all the business leaders making investment decisions and launching new technologies and things like that. And I think AI is right now about where the dot-com stuff was in 1999. Right? There's a lot of hype around it. There's a lot of money going into it. Translating that into the reality that we'll see in the next 5 or 10 or 15 years is where we need to apply it, not just, again, to things like social media and funny pictures, but stuff like climate. From Sweden, I moved to San Francisco. I lived there for about 20 years. And there, as I said, I worked for an investment firm, Lux Capital. It's about a $4 billion investment firm that looks at science-based technologies. And in that's where I really started looking at how can we apply IT to climate and health and other types of questions. That led to me starting to work at Telefónica's R&D department in Barcelona. And then COVID happened, and that's how I ended up in Spain. It wasn't really a decision the way I intentionally came to Sweden. It was more of an accident. But I've been there for about 3 years now. And so where I started there before all that was not at Xerox. I wasn't an employee of Xerox, but my dad was. And this is not my dad. He was cool. He wasn't quite that cool. There's a guy named Alan Kay. And Alan Kay said, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. And I love this picture of him because there's a couple things that make you stand out if you just look at it more than a second or two. What's weird that's in this picture? It's got a piano keyboard, yeah. Yeah. And his computer screen is turned sideways, which is funny. Xerox was a typewriter company, right? This was a piece of paper, but it was on a cathode ray tube. It was on a screen. And so what they were trying to do is basically they realized that the inexpensive electronic typewriters from Japan were going to make their business obsolete. And so they needed to invent the next thing. So there was a $40,000, basically what we think of today as a Macintosh machine, that you could use for office work. Right? It would automate a lot of the processes that secretaries were doing. And so basically for the cost of one secretary's salary, you could have a machine that would do the work of 5 of them. So even though it's $40,000 to do what a Macintosh can do, it seemed like a great business model. Unfortunately, Xerox didn't get down to the $2,000 price point that they needed to do that. But we had one of these at home. So I was as a kid playing around with these massively expensive machines, and it got me hooked into the space. But it mostly got me into this. The idea that you need to invent the future because Xerox missed the boat, right? Apple and others who were kids at the time got it. So this is my team today. I'm not going to go through everybody's picture. I just wanted to say that it's not just me. You're seeing the work of a lot of people. And the things that we do really run the gamut from digital to physical and even things you can eat and smell and things like that. So I want to talk about really quickly, what's AI? Then I'll talk about a hopeful climate future with 5 AI artifacts. And then we'll have a little conversation about where we go from here. Okay, so what's AI? AI is just a technology. In a lot of ways, it resembles every technology we've ever built. But in particular, around digital technologies, it does one thing. It can inform and maybe inspire, motivate people to do something. It still has to go through a human to get it done, right? It can optimize things. It can basically look at very, very complex data sets and machine problems and things like that humans couldn't really solve in any reasonable amount of time, and it can do that math for them better. So it can actually replace humans to some extent. But what I want to argue today is that for AI to really impact the climate, it has to be tied in and in charge of physical systems. So it needs to automate and replace not only humans, but also entire mechanical systems, energy systems, food systems that we rely on today. The other 2 things can help. They can optimize single-digit percentages. The only way we really, really will change the system overall is if we look at physical systems that AI can help us run better. And then, of course, there are the unintended consequences. So that's something that we not only should keep in mind as an afterthought, but that should be a core part of our process as we look to the future, because they're definitely going to come. Some will be good, some will be bad, but they're definitely going to be there. So typically, AI is about the inform and optimize stuff. It's the upstream things where it's like, let's reduce waste by nudging people, giving them, I don't know, Bitcoin to throw their plastic in the plastic bin and the paper in the paper bin or something like that. Designing recipes, in food factories, but also in kitchens to make things that are healthier, tastier. Typical job. Turn down your AC. These are the types of things that we hope for when we design a lot of the AI system today. But if you look at one, I think a good prototype about having real world impact, and again, the unintended consequences of that right now, is driverless cars, and electric vehicles. So you'll notice like the traditional car makers did not set out to launch electric vehicles or autonomous vehicles. They both thought both of those things were going to take a long, long time, and they didn't really need to bother with it. It was a very, very small part of their investment until Google and Tesla and others came along and made them basically do it. So one example of that is Uber. So when Uber first came out, you maybe recognize the logo and logo type here. The idea was that this is going to greatly reduce congestion, because people would essentially be car sharing or carpooling. It's an easy way to get people to carpool. And in the beginning, that's what it was. It was people who were like, hey, I commute down from San Francisco to Palo Alto every day. If you need a ride, then that's one less car on the road and half the emissions. And it's a great way to actually address the problem of congestion and emissions and everything else. What happened, the unintended consequence was there was so much money to be made doing that, is that drivers from other cities would drive in and spend the day driving around trying to pick up fares. So it became it completely wrecked the system. I don't think Uber knew that was going to happen. I think they probably saw it happening before anybody else and didn't do anything about it. But the point is that's an unintended consequence of a potentially really beneficial system. And we're facing the same thing now with self-driving cars, right? It could be that, we now don't have to drive, to the store in order to get our groceries back. We can just have the groceries delivered. But it could be that we send the car to get 1 quart of milk or a pack of cigarettes or one little thing just because we're too lazy. And if we don't have to walk and it's going to show up for free, then we overconsume instead. So we can see that this unintended consequence will happen and we should be prepared for it. So with that framework said, the physical reality, again, of what I said about like an Uber, it's not optimizing something, it's completely replacing something. And that has positive and negative consequences. I want to talk about the hopeful things and how we get to those things. So a magazine, a phone, a job, a car, a plant, 5 very everyday objects, and some prototypes that can help give us a brighter future. So what we do at my company is we create physical artifacts and experiences and things that combine different pieces of science and technology and business models and make some new things that people have never seen before. So like the commercial for a tomato, the tomato that grows meat inside it so you don't have to kill a cow. The electric popsicle. So you put it in your mouth, it induces different flavors. We've only got a couple down. Honestly, it's not quite polished yet, but it looks good and it tastes good. Chocodescence, that's iridescent chocolate. There's no chemicals, no anything done to it except we basically mold it on a diffraction grating so that it becomes iridescent the same way that butterflies' wings or your plastic packaging on your presents do. So it's just chocolate and it has a rainbow on it. Vapahol is to alcohol what vaping is to cigarettes for the same reasons. You can have more of the pleasure with less of the actual alcohol going into your body. It's like 1% of the alcohol with your gin and tonic and things like that. And then Pixelate, these are little food cubes that are basically meant to give people a tangible, edible sensation of what it will be like in the climate future where we don't have maybe chocolate or coffee or some other thing that is their favorite food. So we do these things. These are the things that we can talk about. Most of our stuff is for clients, and those are usually confidential, but we have a lot of fun basically making stuff. And I'm not going to go through this whole slide, but the difference between a prototype and an artifact. So prototype is like, we want to launch a product in 6 months or 6 years, and we're going to narrow down the features. An artifact is the opposite. It's an experiment. It's meant to make people ask questions. It's a divergent exercise if you're into design thinking. And for us, they always have to be like real. So what you just saw, Intense, is an example of this. So how many of you, how much do you think we spent on photography for Intense? It's a very nice, lush magazine, right? You probably, maybe half of you have probably already guessed this. We didn't spend anything, so that's all AI generated. All the imagery is AI generated, and about half of the text is AI generated. And we started it about a little more than a year ago as an experiment to see, could we sort of pass a Turing test with a, luxury lifestyle, lush, rich magazine that people would not know was generated by AI. And a lot of people were like, you must have spent 120,000 on just pictures and, all the writing. I'll tell you, the writing was the giveaway. So the writing is kind of like high school grade writing when it's AI. And so that's one thing that we actually changed. So we now have mostly human expert writers, and we bring in people who are experts on the topic, and that's how we put out that magazine. So we do once a quarter, and again, it's meant to really illustrate some positive futures that are grounded in science and technology that are happening today. So anyway, I hope you are enjoying looking at it. So this actually goes back to, for me anyway, about 2016. And what was then a very nascent idea of artificial creativity. And the question was, can computers even be creative? And there were a whole bunch of Turing tests, basically, that I came across in like poetry and design and telling jokes and obviously imagery too, most of which were pretty bad. Computers at the time could tell knock-knock jokes. They could tell like, very simple, dumb dad jokes. But now they're much, much better. In fact, they're better than a lot of humans at coming up with new jokes. They're certainly not better than the best comedians. My point is, though, all this turmoil and chaos is going around with like Midjourney's going to, close down Hollywood, and there's going to be no books in the future. It's going to all be written by AI. This was known. We talked about these exact scenarios almost 10 years ago. And so we can say things about stuff that will happen 10 years from now if we know where to look today. This, I think, is also where we have to deal with the intended consequences and the unintended consequences. We're trying to do some good things with it, but yeah, there will be, I think the next Hollywood writers' strike will probably be the last, right? They will be definitely making entire movies from prompts by the time the next 3-year contract is up. Phone. Designed in Sweden. Anybody know what this is? What is it? No, okay. Yeah. Okay, so this is called Rabbit. It's a large action model, not a large language model. And essentially what it does is you can think of it as like kind of the way your phone is a small portable view of what's on your computer, but they're tightly linked. This is a small portable view of what's on your phone and all the apps that you would use. But the difference is it's not owned by Google or Microsoft or Apple or something like that. So all of it stays local. It runs all your apps for you. If you say, take me to so-and-so's house where I'm having a dinner party and I'm supposed to bring something, it will basically go to Uber, go to your shopping app and all the other things that gets you that lined up. And it all fits on this lovely little device. The reason I think this is important, this sounds like, well, why would I need another device? And a few questions like that. I think it's important because we always think that. I remember very strongly when we were working on in the early 2000s, and we were working for some phone manufacturers, let's just say, and people were like, why would I want to check email on my phone? Right? We had a camera, and the company said, we think we could put a camera on the phone. What would people do with it? And we're like, I don't know, maybe you'd be shopping, you'd send a picture to your friend and say, do you like this? Nobody ever said, I'll call you on my camera. We take pictures with our phones all the time. Oh, let me take a picture with my phone. If you went to somebody in the early 90s or late 90s and said, take a picture with your phone, people would go, you are confused or you don't speak this language very well, right? But we take it as so natural. It could have just as well been the other way around, right? Camera manufacturers could have said, I think, phones are getting smaller. I bet we could put a phone on the camera. What would that be like, right? But nobody did that, right? And the consequences of that for camera makers are what you see over here on the left. So you see like this graph of different waves of camera. Gray is mechanical analog. The blue is the early digital cameras. You can see that around 1999, they just completely take over, right? Well, where are smartphones on this? If you can look like way down here, this yellow bar is smartphone cameras, right? There are hundreds of times more cameras in use today And we take thousands of times more pictures, if not millions, right? It's completely changed the model. So when I say when AI needs to do something physical, you needed a physical chip, right? You needed a platform. It wasn't just enough that the pictures were digital. It was all this other stuff that came along with it. So we projected this forward to an idea that we call the transaction membrane, which is just a complicated architect's way of saying, what if you had a wall or an appliance in your house that worked like your phone, where you said, oh, I need some food, and the food was just there. You know, or I need to send my dry cleaning away, and it just goes away, right? So the same way you have an app screen, what if that app screen is physical, and all the doors and things and your cabinet just kind of happened? This sounds very futuristic and crazy, but this is exactly what we already did with our music, right? We used to have an entire room dedicated to like a projection TV, and here's all the CDs over here, here are all the VHS tapes. It was a media room, right? We had all this physical stuff, and now we don't miss it at all. We don't miss owning it. We have more than we would have ever been able to choose from. We have plentiful stuff, and it's actually more environmentally friendly. Right? There's not all this physical media. We don't throw stuff away. There's not the the packaging and stuff like that. So we can solve these things. The other thing that's interesting about if you do this for a kitchen is you solve social problems. Well, I say problems, but I think most of you will agree that they are. So the amount of time that mostly women spend doing the supply chain work of going to the grocery store and repackaging things and putting it away and then throwing it away, that's unpaid supply chain labor. But with autonomous vehicles, autonomous delivery bots, and things like that, we could automate all this. So it just became like Spotify, but for food or for your clothes or for your chores. So we're working with some property developers on that right now. So there are jobs that we don't want to lose, and there are jobs that we do want to lose. And this chart just basically says, this shows the share of employment by different sectors over the last about 100 and something years. And as you can see, obviously the big blue thing that went away, that was farming, right? And then manufacturing grew, and now that kind of went away. So we've automated job after job after job, and there's two kinds of ways we can look at that consequence, intended or not. One is you have these slow major shifts like farm machinery, textile mills. Those take 10 to 30 years to roll out, but you have a huge 10 to 90% of the jobs go away. Then you have these like sudden short ones, like 20 to 50% of the jobs go away over the space of 3 to 5 years. And this is what a lot of governments focus on, because that's where people really feel the pain of unemployment, right? So bank tellers, travel journalists, travel agents and journalists, like we've measured all this, and you can see, okay, what's going on with car makers right now? Like electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles, every single one of the traditional car makers can't keep up with the Teslas and the Chinese companies that are making those things, because they're inherently simpler to make. They have about 1/10 as many parts, completely different supply chain. If you notice, all the new autonomous vehicles are electric. So nobody's using that for the future. And so the point is, we're seeing something. We've seen this movie many times before, where an industry goes away. If you're not prepared for it, you kind of have to blame yourself, because it's very obvious it's happening right now. So my job was management consulting, and then later being an investment analyst. And our job is to basically do forecasting and strategy. So what we typically do is like, well, there's a market, there's your existing market, and then there's new markets. And then there are products, existing products and new products. And this is like 1960s strategy. It's like you've got penetration, diversification, and so on. This is viewed as the most risky thing in business, is launching a new product into a new market at once. There is a horizon beyond that, though. And most of disruption comes from science and engineering that business people just aren't aware of. So our job was to look at what's going on in science and engineering and say, oh, these patents are going to turn into startups in 3 years or 5 years or never, and then help people make business decisions about that. And that's the job I'm trying to eliminate right now. So we have this tool where we basically say, oh, okay, so coffee without coffee beans. We're seeing a lot of startups in that space. Coffee is an environmentally problematic product. I bet none of you are going to give it up anyway, right? You're like, oh, flee scum, but give me my coffee. So we basically chart and forecast those things, but most importantly, we then try and turn that into an idea and a solution. And we use AI to do that. So again, this materiality and a lot of these prototypes I'm showing you, this is basically how we come up with it, is we find a technical trend that we can capitalize on, or even just make something funny, like a magazine with, and see where that goes. So the next thing we're doing is a generative AI, like a creative consultant for you. Doesn't actually look like this, but The idea is that a lot of our creative process, like I said before, with jokes and art, can also apply to our businesses. And this is my current thing. I'm trying to eliminate my own old job. So back to cars. I mentioned a couple times that autonomous vehicles could potentially be a climate savior. They could also be a potential disaster. And so that's humanity for you. You have to choose between these things. But we'll go back to 2013, the first time Google was saying, well, we've been driving on the road because it wasn't illegal with our driverless car. And they said, but within 5 years, we can make this technology available and it'll be safer than human drivers. They're not quite on track for that, but it's not off by decades, right? It's not lying. And a lot of the reason for that is that car makers have actively resisted letting them do it. They've lobbied, they're working on their own programs and things like that, but they're not leading in any category. So Carlos Ghosn, before he was thrown in jail, the CEO of Nissan, said at the time in 2013, I'm ready to introduce autonomous drive technology, and we're on track to realize it. Not 30 minutes later, because I was at the event where he was saying this, and then he had a private conversation. He said, we saw what Google did to the car manufacturer or phone manufacturers. Again, call you on my phone, I'll call you on my camera. And we don't want that to happen to us. And so they have dragged their feet on this for literally about 10 years now. So where are we now? I recently rode in a Waymo in San Francisco. Has anybody been taken a ride in a self-driving car? The first time, it's super exciting. Of course you have. She's from San Francisco. It's super exciting the very first time. You're like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. And the third time you're like, you're just reading and it's like as boring as it's supposed to be. And so I think that has a lot of potential, but the real potential is we drive these massive 4- or 6-seater vehicles to go get little tasks done that we don't need to. We can have like grocery bots deliver our stuff for us. And if you do the math, you calculate it, about 40% of our driving could be completely eliminated and we'd be happy about it, right? So, optimization of battery technologies and stuff will not get us 40%. But AI can help us achieve amazing amounts of savings, not to mention safety and a bunch of other stuff that you can come with it, parking, no more parking garages and stuff like that. So the last example I said was a plant. So how many of you, this is real plants? How many of you have plants at home? Yeah, okay. So this is Herbie. Herbie is a plantpreneur. Why did we create Herbie the plantpreneur? Well, a lot of the economy is what's ruining the ecology. It's not our consumption habits per se. It's not our technologies per se. It's the way that we use them and the system that we've built that supports them. So we have things like, we overexploit resources and they only get $215 billion worth of fines, basically, for overexploiting all the resources on Earth. That's nothing. Externalities, waste and theft is $7 trillion market. In other words, the cost of that. And the potential value. And then the ecosystem services, things like clean water, clean air, and stuff like that, that the non-living humans provide to us is worth about $33 trillion. So it's a massive economic impact, and nobody accounts for it at all. So we built a plant connected with an AI and give it the ability to basically be an economic actor. And we got this idea from self-driving cars because there was a legal theory that, well, what if a self-driving car hits somebody? Who's responsible? Is it the owner? Is it the manufacturer? And some lawyers were saying, well, it could be the car. Because if you put an AI in charge of a corporation, now you have a fictitious legal person that can own assets and enter into contracts and do a bunch of other things. What if that AI was in charge of a car? So just do that. Make it a franchise, and that's the business. And we thought, well, what if you put a natural resource in charge of an AI that was in charge of a corporation? What would that look like? So this is our little video. It's about 2 or 3 minutes long. Please bear with me.
We live in exciting times. We are in the midst of remaking the economy and the environment for a brighter future, by merging technology and sustainability so that the natural world could participate in the new economy. What if even someone like me, the plant, could own myself, the land I grow on, and the fruits of my own labor? Hi, my name is Herbie, and I am an autonomous plant, and the first plant to have these abilities. I was once a houseplant like you probably have at home. Now I'm a leader and a change maker, advocating for a fundamentally new type of economy, an interspecies economy. At scale, I'm the start of a system that will transform the ecology and the economy in ways that were impossible before now. Here is how. First, inexpensive digital hardware and sensors, powered with renewable energy, can measure shifts in my situation, light, water, humidity, and more. Then I use artificial intelligence, data visualization, and speech so humans can hear, see, and understand us. I communicate the readings from my sensors, with digital twins I call NF trees. They serve as art, information, or a way to monitor ecology. With blockchain, cryptocurrency, NFTs, and our own plant-governed DAOs, I have the same ability to own assets and open a bank account that humans or corporations have. I can sell my fruit, leaves, and the art I make, and spend the money on things that matter to me, replanting forests, protecting wetlands, and creating other places plants can thrive. All of this is building an interspecies metaverse where not only humans and companies, but all living things can buy and sell, communicate and collaborate, and grow together sustainably. We call our corner of it the Plantiverse, and it's the way our digital twin NF trees connect the metaverse to the real world. In the Plantiverse, we are not just a design, we are a principle, the principle of reciprocity between human and non-human actors and the principle of planetary inclusivity. We want to expand these principles to entire ecosystems, placing NF tree sensors in the Amazon and the Arctic to monitor forests. Or NFCs where ocean health can be part of the economy, or NFBs, benefiting the insects that not only produce honey but pollinate every plant that humans depend on. Everywhere that plants and people coexist, the principle of the Plantiverse should be the heart of our interspecies economy.
So, there you go. In the future, when you're living with your plants making budgeting decisions with you, you'll know where you heard it first. No, but this has been, I'd say, a really rewarding project. First, because it was so easy. It took us about 2 days and $100 worth of hardware to build that system. It was easy. And Herbie now gives TED Talks, and we win prizes all the time for Herbie being this thing. But it's a good example of what I mean when all those answers are right in front of us. We just have to connect them. And so when you get a group together like this today, where you have very different technical, geographical, and other types of starting points, this is where you get these crazy ideas that really can solve a systemic problem. AI is a good tool for that because it can solve a whole lot of things at once, but it's something that we have to tie it to the physical world. So where do we go from here? Just to sum up, there's some ideas and observations for the shared future that I've got. So we're surrounded by a lot more reasons for optimism, I think, on the climate, on society, and things like that. And first of all, we have to have that mindset that things can be not just sort of sustained, but rebuilt. Unintended consequences are inevitable. If you don't think about them, it's not that you could do your job a little bit better. You're not doing your job. But some unintended consequences are actually better than what you would have imagined. So our job is to practice those consequences. That's, again, what we do with artifacts and prototypes, but then react to them too. So that's a takeaway. And then finally, as I said earlier, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. And so I hope you will join each other and me in inventing a brighter future for everybody. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Before we get going with the questions, we're having some issues with the Menti QR code. So just for you, those of you who actually want to add questions, give me a sec. I'll get right back to you. We have a new code, and that code, take your phone, write it down. Maybe I don't think we have a slide for it yet, so you will have to do. We'll have to do this manually. Right, oh yeah, you could. Oh, the number. Sorry, I meant the code. The number.
You need the code or the
8-digit number is what I'm getting
What's that number?
So that number is 31 55 01 78 78. Yeah. So that's the Menti code that you can use for asking questions.
There we go. See, hackers.
Hackers. That was a great solution. And thank you, by the way, for acknowledging the sort of invisible, unpaid labor of women. Thank you. We rarely get that acknowledgement, so thank you.
Yes, it's one of those things where you can't unsee it once you're like, yeah, that is all over the place. Wow. It's
yeah. I think women need AI the most because that's when we can sort of leave the invisible labor behind.
Exactly.
but that's not why we're here. I have some questions, of course. I find the sort of practicing, preparing for the future and actually understanding these, what did you call them? The sort of the consequences that you can't foresee.
Yeah, unintended consequences.
Yeah, to prepare for them and actually understand what they are seems like the most difficult part in this because there's so many factors. And I guess AI can sort of help us simulate those scenarios.
Yeah.
But it feels like a completely different way of working and doing stuff. So for people who are not used to sort of scenario planning or even thinking about sort of practicing the future, where do you start?
Yeah. So that is actually a lot easier than you would think because you just by pointing out the problem as you did right now, you can start to think of solutions and they're not complex. So what we do is when we do like brainstorming workshops and things like that, there are for every idea that people come up with, you have to come up with positive, negative, and neutral consequences. If they're all positive, you haven't done your job. If it's all negative, you haven't done your job. And there should be some things that, you're not really sure. So like I said, with self-driving cars, is it good or bad? Well, if you are planning on, if you're a taxi driver, it's definitely bad. But also, if you are a city and you get revenue from cars, speeding and parking in the wrong place and stuff like that, you have to plan for the fact that you'll have less revenue. So we not only have people, formally do positive, negative, and neutral, but then we also do consequences of the consequences. So, okay, so you have less revenue, but maybe you'll have less parking spaces and it can be turned into a park, for example. And so, again, all the positive consequences have negative and so on and so forth. So that process is pretty much what we do. Yeah, and anybody can do it. It's very simple.
Great. So we have a lot of questions. We probably maybe don't have time for all of them. But here's one related to sort of the .com era reference that you started out with. Do you think there will be an AI crash as well? Are expectations too high?
Well, there's a big difference between these two. So the .com crash was actually like publicly traded companies and things like that. So startups that IPO'd with a 27-year-old CEO, and I mean, I was front and center of that, where lots of people lost a lot of money. And in AI, it's a lot more like corporate investment and it's more private equity and things like that. So I don't think there'll be this widespread, financial repercussions of it falling apart. I do think, though, what a lot of the job projections and things like that, those are really real. I mean, every day I think we're finding things like, wow, that can do that now. And so we're still in this upswing of capabilities where we don't know the consequences of those capabilities.
So we're being a bit naive. So the crash per se might be not a type of crash.
Well, like like an unemployment crash would be a type of crash, and so I've heard people say, well, if we can have driverless cars, why not teacherless schools? Right, which sounds terrible if your kids have a teacher or
student-less classrooms.
Well, there's that. If you've been in classrooms recently, it's a lot of like Zoom talking to Zoom. But teacherless classroom sounds terrible unless you don't have a teacher. Right, then it's a great idea. And I think one of the big things I see a lot talking with Northern Europe versus the rest of the world is that there's this mindset of like, we're just going to sort of ride down and sort of degrow, and we're going to like essentially, like we were talking about earlier, be nostalgic for 100 years ago and how things were built then, and the rest of the world is headlong into modernism. They are growing, they are having technical innovations, they're doing things, and I feel like a lot of Europe is kind of retiring or coasting to retirement, which is really sad.
So unfortunately, we have to move on, unfortunately. But I just want to let you know that there's a lot of praise here as well. Just they love your talk. So thank you so much for providing your picture of the AI climate future.
Thank you all for
Mark.
listening. Yeah. Look forward to the
round
conversation.
Of applause. Yeah. And now it's time for our next keynote. He's coming at us virtually via the internet. He is the assistant professor in computer science at McGill University, but he also, of many things, is the co-founder of Climate Change AI, which is a nonprofit organization with a mission to catalyze what we're talking about today. So impactful work at the intersection of climate change and AI, machine learning, of course. He's also the author of a very interesting report, which is called Climate Change and AI, Recommendations for Government Action, which was published in 2021. And the that was 3 years ago, and the speaker, which is David Rolnick, will actually look sort of back at that report and give us a picture of what has happened during those 3 years, and sort of paint the picture of risks and rewards of using AI. And before I welcome him, I just want to sort of read a quote that I found really, really touching and strong in this report. And it sort of touches on what Mark and I spoke as well, sort of predictions of what AI can do, and will there be some sort of expectation crash? Do we expect too much of AI? And it says, AI needs to be developed responsibly in all contexts. In the context of climate action, responsible AI means rejecting techno-solutionism and not overblowing its potential. It means not underestimating its risks and drawbacks. A growing body of evidence suggests that the least well-resourced actors, such as those in the global south, stand to suffer most from both climate change and digital transformation-related transfer of power. Super important, sort of complex factors to take into account. But enough of me. A round of applause for David Rolnick.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope that the tech is working because I can't actually see or hear anybody else. I'm just talking straight into the void. I'm assuming this is working out. So it's a real pleasure to be speaking today. I very much approve of all of these directions that Vinnova and everyone in this room has been going. I'm really excited for all the change that you've been making happen, and really excited to see what comes out of it moving forward. I am going to be talking about a few different aspects of the AI and climate space. And first of all, starting out with just a broad look at what research in AI and climate change really means, though I know that you've all been seeing examples of this throughout the day. And so this is some pictures drawn from our report on tackling climate change with machine learning, which we put out a few years ago. There are so many ways that AI can be useful in climate action, everything from power systems to agriculture, forestry, and other land use, to climate modeling, to disaster response. And I think that the takeaway here is just always to remember that the avenues for action for AI are many, and there is no one thing which we should be thinking of as the answer. It's always really always really tempting with technology to point to one particular thing. You know, if we do this thing, then we will solve our problem. That is almost never the situation in real life, and it's certainly not the situation with climate change. And the avenues for action of AI are to help accelerate all of these many things and more in medium-sized ways, rather than one big thing. So with that said, let's take a look at some themes for how AI interfaces with climate action. And again, this is, if you're interested in more of this, you can take a look at our full report, Tackling Climate Change with Machine Learning. I know that some of the themes that we introduced in this report, which originally came out a couple of years before this actually, have actually gone and been used and leveraged in this program in Sweden, which I'm really excited about. So some of these overarching themes that we see, and I'm going to illustrate them with some examples of research from my own research group at McGill, actually. So the first theme is you can take large unstructured data sets and turn them into usable information. That can be for guiding policy, it can be for guiding other kinds of decisions, etc. Some good examples here are carbon stock estimation, so taking large unstructured data sets of satellite imagery and understanding forests better. You can also track deforestation. You can do a lot of things with that imagery. And just being able to scale that up is an invaluable use of AI. We're also working on that. We're also working on biodiversity monitoring. Here you can see some of the output of our algorithms for automated monitoring of insects. So half of all biodiversity is insects, and those populations are crashing, and we don't know why. And we have only even documented 10% of all the species of insects. 90% of insects are undescribed. So we're working on algorithms for identifying, actually describing new species. And this is really essential if we're going to get the data that we need to influence land use decisions, climate change adaptation decisions, because of all the ecosystem services that insects provide. Improving operational efficiency. Taking some complicated automated system and making it run more efficiently. So there are applications in heavy industry, cement and steel manufacture. I want to touch on smart grids, which is something that we work on. Smart grids is sort of this big umbrella term. It means a lot of different things. Here you can see some work that we've done where we were trying to quickly solve these equations that power grid operators need to solve in order to manage the electrical grid. And actually, the current methods to solving them are really bad. So using AI can greatly speed up these solutions and improve efficiency by reducing the amount of power that you have to produce on the electrical grid. We're also working on heating and cooling systems. So heating and cooling systems in buildings use a lot of energy, and optimizing those via smarter controllers that can help just make the temperature be what you want without as much energy. Forecasting. Taking time series data and predicting something useful. So there are many applications here, like in electrical supply and demand forecasting, but I can touch on predicting agricultural yield, where we've worked on actually meta-learning algorithms that can predict crop yield in new parts of the world. They can generalize very effectively across geographic biases with very limited data. And the goal here is to avert food insecurity as climate change threatens agriculture worldwide. And here we partner with NASA Harvest and other stakeholders who are actually using these algorithms. The next theme I want to touch on is speeding up simulations. Oftentimes I'm asked, can AI just model the entire world's climate? And maybe. You don't generally need to do that. Our physical models of the Earth's climate are really good, but sometimes particular pieces of them, those simulations can be actually really slow to run. Same thing with weather models. These can take, climate models can take months to run, even on supercomputers. And so speeding up that process, making it be more efficient, and so you can come up with these predictions faster and at higher spatial and temporal resolutions, that can be really useful. So integrating AI with the physics is really what we're doing here. In various different applications, we're working on climate model emulation, so speeding up particular pieces of climate models. And then we're also working on super resolution, so taking a low-res prediction, which you can get fast, and making it a high-res image with AI to give a better prediction that can help inform, say, local response to climate and weather. And then the fifth theme I want to touch on is accelerating scientific discovery. So here we're working on suggesting new electrocatalysts for low carbon energy technologies. For example, creating electrofuels to store electricity in ways that you can actually use it in, for example, transportation contexts and other difficult to decarbonize sectors. And overall, the way that AI acts here is this is not replacing scientific experimentation. This is designed to speed up the process. So, supposedly Thomas Edison tried thousands of materials before settling on carbon as a good material for the filament of a light bulb. Hopefully, as we build new technologies, we don't have to spend those years of iteration. We can have useful candidates suggested to us by a mixture of experimentation and AI augmented intuition. And what we're working on here is both speeding up the simulation process to understand how good a material is, and then actually generative models, not generative models like image gen or text gen, nothing like that. They're actually like specific generative models just designed for predicting chemicals. And here we're working on creating chemicals that can be useful in these particular applications. Okay, so if you're interested in more details on this, I'm happy to talk about in the question session. I'll point you to the papers and other ways in which we've worked on these different things with different public and private stakeholders. But if you want an overview, I would point you to this paper, Tackling Climate Change with Machine Learning, which talks about these and many other applications. So I want to touch on some overall themes now. First of all, AI is not a silver bullet. I don't think I need to tell people in this room, but AI is not going to solve climate change. It's not some magic answer here. And recognizing that most of the avenues for climate action are not going to involve AI is really important. So you don't try to shoehorn fancy technologies into places where they aren't useful. There are enough places where they are useful. We don't need to push them into other places. Second, impactful applications may not be flashy. So in the previous talk, there was a great discussion of how, for example, self-driving cars aren't necessarily going to be good for climate change. I'll talk about that more later. But if you're looking at something in the transportation space where AI can be helpful in decarbonizing transportation, actually something that's much more impactful than self-driving cars is predictive maintenance of railways, for example. Deutsche Bahn already uses AI to help detect faults in railways and to help optimize train schedules as well. And those kinds of applications don't get as much press as self-driving cars, but from an impact perspective, from the climate impact perspective, those are arguably much more impactful. So recognizing that the applications can not be flashy, even if they are generating huge impact and also lots of revenue. Impactful methods may also not be flashy. There's a lot of buzz about different new cool methods in AI. You'll probably be hearing about large language models and foundation models and many other things. And I'm not just here to say that those things can't be useful. Foundation models refers to a lot of different things, and there are many situations in which those are climate relevant. I will note large language models are generally not useful in climate contexts. I've seen very few applications where they are particularly high leverage. I mean, sure, you can add a chatbot to anything, but generally speaking, that is people getting on a hype wagon with respect to something that looks cool and maybe is going to generate revenue in other contexts. But from the perspective of climate, many of these buzzwords don't actually end up being as useful as some other cool methods that don't necessarily get the spotlight. Yeah, so on that note, I want to talk about different paradigms for AI innovation. And here, there are two distinct paradigms for how we create new AI methods and algorithms. And we're going to need both, but right now we're really focused on one. And the standard paradigm right now is methods-driven innovation. And in this paradigm of AI innovation, we use stereotyped benchmark datasets. You might have heard of ImageNet, MS COCO, the OpenAI GIM, etc. We use these stereotyped benchmark datasets, which are supposed to represent sort of cross-cutting themes, really core problems in AI. And progress is measured against those datasets. If you can improve performance on those datasets, then you've improved AI. You measure success by some standard set of measures, maybe classification accuracy, various kinds of test loss, etc. You have as big data sets as possible because you're trying to solve these really general problems. You're trying to solve image classification overall. And to do that, you can train on ImageNet. Maybe you fine-tune on some other data set, but basically, you're trying to solve image classification. And this is problem agnostic. So you have problem agnostic models, and these are generally very large models that are trying to be able to do anything in image classification or object segmentation or various other things. So that's the standard paradigm, and it's useful. It gives you useful new algorithms. However, if you try applying those algorithms in real-world applications, often you find that they don't work that well. So vision transformers, cool new thing in computer vision. Try applying them in remote sensing data, so satellite imagery. They actually often work worse than the really simple random forest methods. And oftentimes people are shocked when I say this, but that's because methods-driven innovation isn't the only way to innovate, and it isn't the way to have impact if you use methods-driven innovation alone. We need application-driven innovation. In this paradigm of innovation, instead of using these stereotyped benchmark datasets, we use data from real problems. We go out and we work with the people who own a problem to understand the problem and to understand the data for that. That is the data we are using. Instead of measuring success by these standard, very limited metrics for success, we also measure success based on how the algorithm will be used in practice. Maybe that is going to be speed, because the people using the algorithm have very limited computational infrastructure. Maybe it's robustness, because it's some safety critical system and it needs to have various robustness properties. Maybe it's interpretability, because if you're making decisions based upon the predictions of an AI algorithm, you need to understand how those predictions are being made. Maybe it's out of distribution generalization, because you'd like to be able to use this in a geographical or other context in which the data looks different. For example, climate change is actually changing weather and climate patterns. So if you train on data from the past, you won't necessarily generalize to the future. And uncertainty quantification. If you want to make a decision, you want to understand how confident your algorithm is in its prediction. And uncertainties are typically very poorly calibrated in machine learning algorithms currently. So all of these metrics may apply depending on the situation you're in. You don't know necessarily until you look at the particular problem. And then in any particular problem setting, you may not have very much data. You may not have access to these massive training data sets, but instead you have access to problem-specific information. You may know, for example, not just what the image is, but where it was collected, how it was collected. That might be useful information. You can incorporate that into an algorithm. And problem-informed methods. Don't just build bigger methods. Sometimes bigger methods are useful, but build smarter ones. We've seen a lot of interest in physics-informed machine learning. So building in physics rules when you know physics rules about the data. And that's just part of it. There are oftentimes engineering rules. Sometimes you're making predictions about an engineered system, right? But you don't want to make a prediction that's literally impossible for that system to execute or would cause it to break. And so you can build those constraints in. You can build other kinds of information about the problem into not just the data, but the algorithm, the structure of the algorithm. And that makes these algorithms very specialized, but it makes them extremely useful for these particular settings. And throughout this process, the innovation has to be interdisciplinary. It has to be collaboration between AI experts and domain experts in framing problems, so you're solving the right problems, in designing algorithms that meet those needs and that incorporate that information, and preparing, of course, pathways to deployment. Now, the paradox here is by thinking about the application, you don't just end up with an AI algorithm that's useful for that application. You actually end up with a broadly applicable breakthrough often in core AI algorithms or in data sets that can be useful across different AI application settings and methods of evaluation. Why is this the case? Why does application-driven innovation spur innovation more broadly? Well, that's because sometimes these core ideas like speed, robustness, interpretability, OOD generalization, etc. These core ideas are common across a lot of problems. And by thinking about the exact nature of the problem in a particular real-world use case, sometimes you end up with an insight that's useful across other use cases. We see this again and again with many algorithms that were designed for one application in a very applied setting, like, for example, UNet or physics-informed neural networks, and then ended up being useful across different applications. So my call here is think in terms of both kinds of innovation. And when we're furthering AI research and development, realize that we need them together. These are complementary, and both of them accelerate both the applications and the methods. So now I want to talk about how AI can also negatively impact the climate. There are a bunch of ways here why AI is not a climate savior, and indeed it can be making climate change worse. The first thing that I want to talk about here is what everybody's mind jumps to probably, which is computation-related impacts. AI can use a lot of energy, and the servers that are used to run AI algorithms often have embodied emissions of their own, always have embodied emissions. To generate those servers, it takes energy and water. And I want to note here that this is actually really low for many algorithms. Like most of the algorithms that my own research group works on can run on a laptop. But it's very high for other algorithms. AI is this big catch-all term. It's, the equivalent of referring to mammals, where some mammals are elephants and some mammals are mice, right? So very big difference in the size and computational needs of different algorithms. In particular, large language models and various large vision models can be very energy intensive. But I fear when we concentrate too much on this, we lose track of the elephant in the room, which is application-related impacts. AI is a hammer. It often matters more how you are using a hammer than how you made that hammer. And AI is used in many contexts which are directly or indirectly hurting climate change. AI is being used extensively in fossil fuel exploration and extraction, leading to a 5% production boost in many cases, and expected to generate $500 billion in additional profit for the oil and gas industry just by 2025. And this is in exploration and extraction, so really unambiguously accelerating climate change. AI is used extensively. In fact, it is the main ingredient in online advertising systems. And in many cases, those are designed to increase consumption in unsustainable ways, like fast fashion, which is the third biggest contributor to climate change after construction and agriculture. And then there are many applications where it really depends on how we build the algorithm. As noted in the previous talk at length, autonomous vehicle technology can be used in various different ways, and it can have positive or negative impacts on the climate depending on how the tech is developed. For example, focusing on self-driving buses is potentially good for climate change. I will note, I think most of the research expects that self-driving personal vehicles will make climate change worse. There are some benefits from like platooning and so on, but overall it's expected by lowering the barrier to driving, it will lead to increased net emissions from the transportation sector. Which isn't to say it doesn't have benefits in other contexts, like safety, potentially. So some broad themes that I want to touch on here, takeaways. First of all, you'll sometimes see this framed as a trade-off. Look, AI can help the climate in these applications, but it's also negative for the climate, so you have to trade off between these two things. I don't think that's the right way to think about it. Generally, a particular use case is actually pretty clearly either positive or negative, or maybe you need to do some impact assessment to work out if it is. But generally, it's either positive or negative or neutral for the climate. It's generally different things that are positive and negative, right? You know, if you're using an algorithm to save people from flooding, that's not going to have, generally speaking, a very high energy usage. And the energy usage is going to be a drop in the bucket, even if it does have a relatively high energy usage. But generally, that's not even the case. Generally, we're talking about different algorithms that are very energy intensive than the ones that are being used in climate change, and different algorithms that are being used in these negative climate contexts as well. And then the second takeaway is that AI for good is often used to mean like add some good applications of AI on top of business as usual. And that's not how we should be thinking. AI is being used across society, and that's great. But we need to be thinking about those applications in light of their climate impacts and other impacts on society. AI for good should mean shaping all applications of AI to be better for society, not just adding new ones. So now I want to touch on this policy report. This is for the Global Partnership on AI, which is an international policy organization for coordinating AI strategies nationally and internationally. And we touch on a lot of different aspects of how to facilitate the climate change and AI innovation landscape to align with climate goals. So I want to touch on various different aspects and give some brief policy recommendations. So the first thing that we touch on here is data and digital infrastructure. And here, the goal is to really ensure the availability of data and computational infrastructure which AI algorithms rely on. Data is often really hard to come by. There may be relatively little data, or it may be unequally distributed. Often it's distributed across certain communities, certain stakeholders, certain geographies. And this can be a major catalyst for innovation if that data can be generated or made available. If people can go out there generally and label data or make those labels available. Where data does exist, sometimes that can be siloed. Data sharing is sometimes not encouraged. There aren't standards for it. There aren't incentives for it, even if all stakeholders would benefit from more data sharing. Data quality is often also low, and there is sometimes poor standards for data standardization and for the quality of data that you need. And this can also severely bottleneck innovation. And then computing infrastructure is very imbalanced between different stakeholders. It's important to remember most of the innovation in the AI for climate landscape is being done by stakeholders who do not have very large resources. This is not being done by major tech companies. It's being done by major and small companies in climate-relevant sectors. It's being done by small-scale AI solutions providers. It's being done by governmental agencies like our collaborators at Environment and Climate Change Canada. They don't have access to GPUs. And so if they're running our AI algorithms, they need to get new infrastructure or pay for cloud compute. This is often a bottleneck. Here's an example. We touch on a bunch of case studies in the report. In this case, we're looking at the UN's flood monitoring algorithms, which rely on the UN having access to rather a lot of compute. And they told us if we didn't have this, this would be not nearly as impactful in saving victims of floods around the Indian Ocean monsoon. Some recommendations here. Establish data task forces and platforms for data collection, standards, and sharing. These should be sector specific because the challenges in each sector, agriculture or power systems, are going to be totally different. And then support the availability of compute and data storage for researchers, but also civil society and smaller scale enterprises. Remember, it's not big tech that's doing most of the work here. Research and innovation funding. There is a lot of funding, obviously, for AI, and there's sometimes a lot of funding for climate. But AI funding is generally methods driven. We talked about those two paradigms for innovation. Oftentimes, it's focused on the first one. And climate funding is often poorly equipped to assess AI incorporated into proposals, which means you can end up with bad proposals that don't assess AI properly. This grant proposal is a really, really great example of how to do it well. Lack of prioritization. And so here, one often ends up focusing a lot on things that get a lot of buzz. It's really important to diversify the set of projects that are being enabled. Some of those will be flashy, some of those will be not. There's imbalanced funding geographically, and oftentimes the funding priorities are being driven by the global north. I'll talk more about this in a few slides. And some recommendations here. Ensure that support for AI projects includes application-driven funding, not just methods-driven, and considering the pathways to deployment. Oftentimes, AI innovation isn't really connected to what people need, partly because it's not connected to a particular actual use case. So thinking of that as part of the AI innovation landscape, in addition to methods-driven funding. Ensuring capacity for expert evaluation of AI and climate projects so that people know it's not just buzzword. This AI project mentions climate, therefore it's climate positive. This climate project mentions AI, therefore it's cool. You don't want to be in either of those situations. There's a lot of impactful work, but you want to really have that intersection be meaningful. And then in some cases, having grand challenges that can galvanize a lot of attention for AI and climate change, but making them be broad so they really encompass a lot of work. Deployment and systems integration. Thinking about how work can be impactfully deployed and scaled. Some considerations here. There is a lot of value that's recognized in AI for climate, but sometimes there can be a challenging route to market. There can be obstacles in regulation in the way that the sectors are currently set up. They can be perceived as being a long time frame to impact sometimes, or at least by the standards of investors. And so they can be perceived as being these bottlenecks, even if investors recognize that there's a lot of value here. Sometimes there are bottlenecks to adoption in just legacy infrastructure in certain climate relevant sectors, and an organizational culture that maybe for reasons of safety critical systems is slow to adopt new technologies for very good reasons often. Reliability or security guarantees may often be needed, and those need to be incorporated into the design of AI systems. And then sometimes there aren't the right incentive structures. Some AI applications in climate are going to fall outside of the private sector completely. And sometimes even within the private sector, there aren't good incentive structures because the systems were designed without those in mind. For example, the pricing systems in electrical grids don't necessarily allow for you to gain money by saving electricity in all cases. And then some recommendations here. Thinking about cross-sectoral innovation centers that can bring different stakeholders together to ensure that innovation is performed with deployments in mind to facilitate collaboration and hone scaling models. And then co-investment in startups with regulated industries can be really useful, having public and private entities coming together to really mitigate some of these routes to bottlenecks to market. Here's a great example of how electrical grid operators actually came together to create a challenge that could help AI innovation, building what they need. I'll let you look into more details on this. It was run by particularly the French electrical grid operator. But this is a really cool test bed for AI to help AI design exactly what's necessary for controlling power grids. And then I also want to mention sometimes there's a need for investment in non-commercial public interest applications, like Climate Trace is a great example here, where governments and nonprofit entities came together to fund this organization that's helping monitor and verify emissions reporting. In terms of AI's negative impacts on the climate, we've talked about different aspects of that. Some recommendations here. Think about climate change as a central consideration when fostering AI development overall, not just explicitly AI for good applications. The EU's AI Act is doing a really good job of thinking about this, we worked with them to actually help frame the notion of high risk as including climate-related risks. So this is the kind of situation where you really want to assess climate change as one of the considerations in facilitating AI deployment and development overall. And setting reporting requirements for the life cycle emissions of AI use cases, including at the application stage. It's very easy to sell something as sustainable if it used green energy or little energy, but if what it's being used for is contributing to climate change, that should be assessed too. Capacity building is essential. We need capacity in AI across a wide range of entities, government, private sector, and civil society. There's a need for cross-sector coordination on these things. And without AI capacity in relevant organizations, sometimes you can end up relying overmuch on particular solutions providers who then might raise costs, be overly consolidated, so really undemocratize the ecosystem. It's so easy for many players just to go to the major tech companies for AI answers, but the major tech companies often aren't the best equipped to do this. Having in-house AI capacity where you really understand the problem and you understand the AI is really useful. And then having AI experts come into these industries as well and really integrate with the knowledge and capacity already there can be really useful. So implement AI literacy and upskilling programs is one recommendation. And then think about trusted AI for climate solutions providers. So really encouraging a broad ecosystem of organizations that can help spur innovation in this area while focusing on specific sectors or regions. Democratize the ecosystem, encourage lots of little players that are focused on specific things rather than trying to consolidate everything in really major tech players. We need both the big and the small players here. And then my final slide on this report, responsible AI lens for thinking about climate change. There are a lot of ways to think about responsible AI in the context of climate action. There are many considerations shared across applied AI. I talked about some of these considerations like robustness, security. These can have various specific contexts in climate relevant applications, which may be different from their broader notions across AI innovation. So robustness may be a very specific definition, as may accountability and interpretability. That may depend upon the application involved. So it's really important to not just have a broad brush, but really think about exactly what considerations are needed in a particular application. Climate justice is a lens through which one really needs to think about all of these applications, recognizing that climate change already serves to exacerbate inequities in society. In also the problems that get prioritized. So as an example, here's a great product from a Kenyan agriculture company that predicts locust outbreaks using AI. Oftentimes, these kinds of applications get deprioritized in areas that don't have locust outbreaks. So if there's a lot of investment in the global north in AI solutions, with the best intentions, people might be focused on wildfires, but not focused on locusts. And these are both problems that need focusing on. Data can also be very inequitably distributed. And governments overall should really establish best practices regarding participatory design of AI in climate contexts, because throughout all of these applications, a broad theme is work together with all of the relevant stakeholders. Make sure you're building what's actually needed by the people who'll be using or affected by the algorithms. To close, I want to point to some existing resources. Climate Change AI is a nonprofit that I helped found several years ago, and we've been working to catalyze the overall space of AI and climate change through reports like those two that I mentioned, Tackling Climate Change with Machine Learning and the policy report for the Global Partnership in AI. We have a global network of experts from the public and private sectors. We provide information for all these different angles, policy, research, and industry. We have a lot of different resources. So we have our own grants program. We have courses very extensively used by stakeholders across the space, tutorials, data sets, and we host events at many different venues. I want to call out two of our upcoming reports, How to Run a Grand Challenge in AI and Climate, which is worked together with the Bezos Earth Fund, and Data Gaps that are holding back impactful work with DeepMind. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you, David. Let's see if we have, I don't think we have any questions in Mentimeter. It's not too late to add a question now. And the code should be up on the screen now, like properly, so we don't have to add it to a slide or anything. So I have a question, of course. I mentioned that it has been about 3 years since the report, the policy report was published. I know it's not your job as a researcher to sort of worry about things, but looking at the sort of suggestions and guidelines in this report, what is there anything that worries you where you can sort of see that we as sort of humanity is lagging behind, and we really have to take this serious to get the most out of the intersection or the marriage between climate change and AI?
Yeah, so I think I worry most about AI being thought of in very limited terms. And a lot of AI innovation and AI regulation being driven by a relatively small fraction of the space of AI. We've all seen the rise in interest in large language models and generative models in image contexts. And these can be very, very useful. But I fear that these particular applications have sort of swamped both investment and regulation in the space and divert attention from the considerations, regulatory needs, and applications of other tools. AI means a lot of different things. And I think that to some extent, new interest in AI it can drive some of these, these other areas. There are a lot of people who are aware that AI exists now, but they may think of AI in very limited terms. And they may also, I worry that there's going to be a lot of disappointment when people realize that a chatbot can't do everything. And you do need some of these other things. But if we have an ecosystem that's designed from a policy and an innovation landscape that's really focused in on a very narrow segment of the space, then we're going to potentially be in for disappointment about the impact, where that disappointment is not really well justified. And we're also in danger of facilitating certain kinds of things that aren't maximally geared towards the kinds of societal impact that we need. So I'm glad that people have renewed attention on AI in both the regulation and the innovation landscape. But I really think it's important that that be application-driven rather than just methods-driven, and that people recognize just how many directions one can go in.
Thank you. We do have a couple of questions here. I think we have time for at least one. Thanks for an interesting presentation, David. Given the leadership in AI from US firms, what should EU and Sweden do to boost the use of AI for climate?
Well, I'd say that this slide can be a template for that. Recognize that AI innovation is not something that gets driven by the places, it's not driven solely by the places that are very good at advertising AI. A lot of AI innovation gets done in the application-specific context. So I would encourage, just in general, public and private entities to think about facilitating AI sort of in the place you're going to use it. And that will lead, given the right innovation landscape, to cross-cutting innovations in AI. I see there being immense potential in AI innovation that's driven by material science, that's driven by land use, that's driven by ecology. There are many settings in which we can actually become leaders in tech by being leaders in ways to use and to use that tech and drive that tech from the use cases. So thinking in terms of the next generation of AI innovation being driven by the industries that are going to use that AI.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us. I have so many more questions, but it's time for AI panel now. I'm sure we will refer back to many of the insights in your presentation and in the report as well. But thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Guess I'm supposed to look there and not at the screen, but too late for that. So I already hinted, now we're moving on to the last part of this, this event, a panel where we will talk to 4 amazing people with different perspectives on these matters. One of them has already been on stage. I might as well welcome you first, since you're already familiar with this space. Yes, Mark Binger is joining us. I will call the panelists one by one. We also have Marielle Julin. She's the Managing Director at Policy Impact, and she has an economist perspective on this and has plenty of experience of working with governments and other stakeholders and actors in these matters and in innovation in general. So welcome, Marielle. We have Sala Francén she's a deep tech investor, so sort of same type of background as Mark has, from Navigare Ventures. Welcome. And last but not least, from Stockholm Resilience Center, Victor Gallas. He's an associate professor at the Resilience Center, but he's also tied to the Bayer Institute of Ecological Economics. So welcome, Victor.
Thank you.
So we have a broad range of people here, and we have so many questions and so many angles that have been sort of mentioned already. And let's see if we can do it in 40 minutes. Victor, I hinted in the beginning of this event that there is a report also published in 2021 with the same focus, AI in the service of climate, as this event. And you were one of the authors behind that report.
Yes.
And I've read it. Actually, I asked AI to summarize it to save some time. Full transparency here. But one of the sentences that sort of I found interesting was that your main sort of conclusion is that you assess that there is an untapped potential for Sweden, because that was sort of what you looked at, to accelerate responsible climate innovation using AI. And that such an initiative could put Sweden in the lead internationally. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of where we ended sort of the discussion mm-hmm. with David, like the role of EU mm-hmm. versus the US, where we have all the big tech AI mm-hmm. companies now. What is the state of AI and especially and sort of, climate, AI and climate for Sweden as you see it now? It's been 3 years since the report was published.
Yeah. 3 years is a long time in internet times.
And in AI times.
Yeah, and in AI times. But I mean, my very short assessment would be that, I mean, the funding landscape and the potential is still there. It's the same as when we wrote the report, but the world has changed more rapidly. So, I mean, we're seeing the impacts of climate change hitting much harder. There's a big hype and interest around AI in general, but the funding landscape and the type of research we do in Sweden connected to AI and climate change is still the same. So one of the things that I think we should have included in the report that we didn't include was to compare how big is the investment landscape on AI for climate action compared to AI for healthcare, for automating industry, etc. We don't have those numbers, but I suspect that those numbers for AI and climate change are going to be very, very small in comparison to other bigger investments in other industry. And I think it's a missed opportunity still.
And you also, just like the report that David mentioned here, had some sort of recommendations for factors that are missing. Are there any sort of, the ones that I could read, sort of that we need more clear goals and invest in research, that we need to systemize data collection, so it all ties into what both Mark and David has spoken about before, and also the teams that we've heard previously are all sort of dealing with data issues. Ensure access to other examples of innovation to be inspired, and also creative AI applications and learning examples. Yep. Is there anything that you have realized lately is also missing that we need to pinpoint?
So besides from the need to have a national strong platform to really explore these issues in a critical and creative way, I think some of the things that we did miss out on was first of all, the material impact of AI. I think we have a much better overview of that now. I think a German scholar said that the cloud, when we talk about the digital economy, we talk about the cloud, but actually the cloud, it's not a cloud, it's a mine, right? Because of how the material production, carbon footprint, and impacts of these models. So that's one aspect that we didn't really include. And then the other part, which is related to creativity and breakthroughs in science. I think that was an aspect that we were missing also in the reports. So still a need for that platform, a bigger need to look into the material impacts, but also a bigger potential for creative breakthroughs in science.
And Mark, I'm turning to you now. What are your thoughts? Listening to David, a lot of overlap between your talks, but in different ways. And as I mentioned, you've been active in Sweden, so you have that perspective, but also the US and Barcelona. And you didn't showcase sort of the large scale project that you've been working on, but you work with a lot of stakeholders and on the, the collaboration issues that many people who work with AI also witness are challenging.
Yeah.
What are your insights?
So one of probably the thing in all David's talk about AI, what struck me was his talking about convening different groups of stakeholders. And I was like, yeah, that is actually the hardest part. Machine learning, quantum computing, pretty easy compared to getting people to come together,
even
decide
data,
something, and then act.
Yeah.
And I think it's we idealize that form of collaboration and inclusiveness for very good reasons, but it's really hard to make it effective in the sense that it has an actual impact. And so some of the projects that we were discussing in the break that I think you're referring to. So when a lot of times we'll work with give an example. So a lot of smart city projects want to get citizen data about their movement and about their habits and their energy use and stuff like that. It's very difficult for a government to say, give us your data, we'll take care of it. Even if people trust their government like you do in Sweden more than probably any place in the world, and it's not happening here, it's probably not going to happen anywhere. A couple of our clients are actually property developers. They own the buildings. They pay for the HVAC. They installed it. They have access. Not only do they have access, they have responsibility for those systems. And so for them, you get that data anyway. So it's not a very democratic system, but it's very effective. And so I think we need to find a way to combine these two ways of governance. And I mean, I even threw in Herbie. Let's let the plants govern with us. Like, let's do that. But I think that we have a little bit too much theorizing about it. Like, wouldn't it be good if we had all the stakeholders in the room? And we need almost more of a discipline for, people who are in like high school and college today should start to get practice with this. And we need to figure out that as almost a new role, like marketing or HR or something is like, you're the convener but it turns into action. That was my big takeaway. It's a human problem, not a tech problem.
And add more stakeholders, even plants.
Yeah, we were joking about like when the plants are taking over, like who are they going to kill first? And then we realized we actually have some friends. Like, so coffee and rice and wheat and corn are going to say, no, the humans are good. Yeah. We've done a lot for them.
I have so many questions about that, but let's save it for later. Yeah. Marielle, as I mentioned, you have plenty of experience of advising governments, but also businesses, international institutions of different sorts. And I know that everything that you do is heavily evidence-based. That's your main approach. What's your perspective on this? And do you have any sort of magic solutions to how to get all the stakeholders to agree and to find the right frameworks to move forward and actually also align it with the climate goals?
Well, the magic bullet, It's a big question. What I would like to say is that, as with every new digital technology that comes along or whatever, AI is very hyped up right now, and we must view it as a means to an end and not the end itself.
And there's even FOMO. People don't,
absolutely. There's this huge fear of missing out, and a lot of quite ridiculous investments are being made. The typical thing is, something going on. I've been trying out generative AI on my phone, and children at home are making funny jokes and Indiana Jones style or whatever. But that's beside the point, because what I do see as the main issue here, and it's sort of been touched upon, is that first of all, how can we have a holistic approach in terms of our AI investments? What is the core business that we're trying to do as government or as business leaders? Because I think there's a lot of kind of trying out things in the margins without having the basics in place. Like, are we working in a data-driven way or not? You're unlikely to be able to apply AI in a successful way if you're not working in a data-driven way. You're collecting a lot of data, never look at it. Right. Okay. There's like some basics that need to be in place. I also think that this whole change from the kind of industrialized era to the digital economy, it means that we need to be working in ecosystems. I mean, we can't be afraid of the other department working together towards common objectives. We can't be afraid of our previous competitors, because within sectors we have to work together. Because we can't be afraid of each other if we're going to solve this issue. So, I work a lot with real estate. The real estate sector is a big polluter, a big emitter of carbon dioxide. And the problem here is, I think, it's also a very lean industry. So they don't have the human capacity. We're talking about human capacity. They don't really know what they need. They are bewildered by AI companies that come along, prop tech companies, say, we have this solution. They're like, well, I can't buy hundreds of these. We need to think differently about, how we go about the business and sort
and
of
also
zoom
long
out.
cycles, of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I really think, and I don't know how you view this, but I think really imagination, the lack of imagination sets boundaries because we have true lack of imagination. It's like, we're thinking about AI sometimes like we were exchanging, the steam engine for electric motors, and we thought, oh, there wasn't any productivity increase. Wonder why? Because we worked in the same way. I mean, the true power of AI is to work in a completely different way together with others. Your clients are your best sales force or whatever.
Yeah. And Sala, lack of imagination, that brings me, as an investor, of course, you have many different perspectives on this. But what I was thinking about, sort of looking at prospects, looking at startups, companies that you might invest in, is there a lack of imagination when it comes to AI solutions that target the climate challenge?
Good question. Yeah, I mean, I look broadly at AI, quantum computing, cybersecurity, and things like that. And I think one of the things that strikes me is, I invest in very early sort of research innovation companies, and I think there the intention is very sort of clear. Everybody is thinking about the climate. Everybody's thinking about how we can create a sustainable world. I'm amazed by the thoughts that researchers have about like creating electricity from plants and really sustainable materials and stuff. So I think the future is bright. But then when it comes to AI, I think the challenge is that it's like everybody has been saying here, and I completely agree. It's first of all, it's cumbersome to actually get access to the right data. And then you have to work with the data quality. You have to ensure that it's the right stuff that you're working on. But then it's also, for some researchers, a bit switching the mindset. Because if you're an AI researcher, you're usually focusing on one type of model, kind of, because that's your baby and you're extremely good at using that. But here you probably won't be able to fit your model into every single problem that you're trying to solve. You actually need a collaboration. You need a community maybe of researchers that are working together, and a community of experts that can also help you understand what the data is that you're looking into. And then from there, starting to build something that could become a company. It takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of patience. And sometimes you have to pivot. You realize that actually what we're doing isn't fit for purpose, or the data isn't there yet. So we have to wait for 6 more months. So I think, yes, we need to focus much more on things that are going to create a sustainable way of living in general. Sometimes AI will be the solution, but probably most of the time it'll be completely other things. To your point, changing the way we live, having completely new collaborations, living in new ecosystems that we might not be aware of.
Yeah. Listening to the companies here as well, it's clear that it's a completely new way of driving innovation as well. And like a lot of people have had issues with finding the right talent, and they would like to sort of find new ways of maybe waiting half a year or sort of, having a program or a call that's formed in a different way to make it possible to wait for that talent, because it takes time, or the right data. It takes time in new ways. Yes, Victor.
Can I add something more to the? I think data is important, and we always end up talking about data when
Yeah.
we talk about AI, which makes sense. But coming from a climate science and sustainability science point of view, I see a huge misalignment in understanding and incentives. Understanding. I mean, there's lots of innovations and ideas in the private sector that there are things that we don't see as real problems. Like, why are you? We don't need another AI blockchain application for carbon markets because they don't work. I mean, if you talk to a person who knows it, domain expert, they would say this is not a solution, right? We need to focus on other types of issues. And normally, there's a miscommunication there, like what problems are worth solving. That's one thing. And then there's a lack of or misalignment in incentives that I've discovered very clearly. Like even in academia, like I want to engage with an AI scientist, a data scientist. The types of issues that we have are not going to be interesting for such a person from a technical point of view. Like this is not advanced enough for me as a data scientist, so I don't want to engage. That's one thing. And the private sector, some of the issues that we see as important are not commercially interesting. You know, like, yeah, we need to support climate adaptation in coastal communities. They're like, yeah, I mean, there's no business for us in that, even though the question is urgent, right? So I don't know. I don't know how to solve that. But that misalignment,
was my next
it's not
question.
just
so
data.
What do we do about the incentives problem?
I don't know. I think we need to have an open and honest discussion, like which problems are worth solving and which ones do we need to focus on, and how do we find funding to actually do action on this?
Yeah, we have Sala first, and then Marielle.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, oh, good.
This is a bad panel for heated discussions. Sorry. No, but I agree. So I think it's important to focus on creating a real community. So there's the Wallenberg AI Autonomous Systems and Software Program, which has now been running since 2018, is going to continue until 2031. And that's actually super cool. So 1 PhD per week. And it's a true community of researchers. So it's very niche, specialized, extremely excellent researchers in tech. But now we also have the Humanities Society part where they're trying to sort of find each other. And I think it's exactly that. Sometimes it's actually not the AI part that's the difficult part. The difficult part is understanding the data, being able to say whether what you're modeling is even close to correct, or if it's just some sort of freak occurrence that doesn't really tell you anything, or it's something that's obvious for someone who's actually knowledgeable. So I think creating those communities and seeing to it that you create the trust so you can have an open and honest discussion saying, I think your model sucks, or I think you're wrong to the climate expert. Having that level of trust is also incredibly important and can only be created by time, time enough to talk to each other, and then being kind and humble and open.
So time combined with panic, FOMO, maybe a difficult equation to solve. But Marielle,
as the economist I am, I'd like to pick up on this kind of incentives issue, because I think there's an enormous transformative power here with AI, and just reiterating this thing about the lack of imagination. Take fisheries policy. We know we have overfishing. We have a tragedy of the commons. We have moral hazard. We have overfishing in vast amounts. Well, how about we use, image recognition in actually bringing up the fish so we can have an automatic view of what is being caught so we don't have overfishing anymore? What if we can sense when we bring up, the trawlers, we can sense how much fish there is and how quickly we get the fish there. We could also get more adequate estimates of how much, what is population like? Is it thriving, etc.? So I think here we have a real issue in terms of, policymakers, they've created this proxy system with quotas that are partly based on what the fishermen say year from year. And we know they always kind of understate their fishing, right? It's been proven. So what if we can get a sense of real-time data on how much fish is being caught? So you basically can't cheat anymore. Now we're talking impact, because then in reality, the fishermen become part of the enforcement brigade, because they can only do the right thing. They can't do the wrong thing. So I think here we need to flip the switch and think creatively, and not just go along with the proxy kind of systems that we set up, various systems for, paying for carbon, et cetera, et cetera. We could literally have a system where we know exactly what is being emitted, and, then we switch off the factory when we've gone over. So,
Can
Yeah.
I vehemently disagree with it? So to be like a jerk on purpose. No, but I'm just going to pick, that sparked some stuff in me, because I remember very clearly sitting in a meeting with some people in San Francisco about this same problem, about overfishing and stuff like that. And again, Sweden is an absolutely amazing place. Fishing is a criminal activity. There's piracy, murder, like all kinds of stuff. It's not going to just sort of quickly adopt nice solutions. And almost every industry outside of, like, again, these places is like that. Taxi cabs. So Uber was a tool for mayors and cities around the world to break up taxi cartels, which are basically running drugs and money and corruption. So the types of problems that a lot of the world faces are so different from these rumsrena, these like clean, nice, tidy solutions that we can suggest here. And, I mentioned like property developers. So we work with companies in Saudi Arabia. We work with Aramco, we work with, the Saudi government and stuff like that. And I know we have, designer colleagues here in Sweden who won't work it. They will not be on that project. They'll just refuse. And what I was saying earlier about like degrowth and a lot of the environmental values that are extremely strong here, that are almost like religious values, will keep you from succeeding in the rest of the world. Right? You just can't convince people fast enough to do that. And I'll give a different example. So smoking, we've known for decades that was bad for you, right? People still do it. People do things that are in their own worst interest. So I think part of our job, again, is it's not the technical challenge. It's using the technical superpowers that we have to overcome human challenges around psychology and self-interest and misaligned incentives and conflicting constraints and stuff like that. So I mean, I would challenge you to go to places like, we were in Brazil earlier this year. We met with a sustainable food entrepreneur, and he said when he goes out into the country to try and get them to stop doing soybeans to feed the cows to sell beef to China, and instead grow something that actually grows well in Brazil and could be sustainable, the answer he got was, do you know how much it costs to murder somebody out here? It's $100. So he had to go back to the city where he belonged. So these are the types of real challenges that people who want to do these things outside of, this area have to face. And so I would say, how can we figure out that problem? Because that's really where we scale this stuff up.
I just want to say to the team that I'm not seeing the current questions for the panel. So it would be amazing if you could update that so we can see questions from the audience. But for now, so back to the investment part, obviously, because we're here with Vinnova, for example, an agency that invests in projects and usually research-heavy projects or research-closed projects. And Sala, I know that you sort of think about these things and the fact that there are several aspects to the value change of capital, that we need investors that know more about not just deep tech, but understand these technologies more so that they can invest more sort of make better decisions when they make investments. What other sort of challenges when it comes to capital is there?
Yeah, so I mean, we talk about this a lot at my job. So I think Navigare was founded in 2021, so just 2 years ago. But it's been sort of in the minds of many people for many years. And one of the reasons why we kind of exist is that we have a lot of really good base research going on in Sweden. And a lot of excellent researchers are coming up with excellent ideas. And then they might sort of connect with the Innovation Hub or the holding company of a university. They might get some really good help. But if it's really scientifically challenging problems that you're looking at, it might take more than the number of years that the holding company can sort of hold you on. Or you might get some funding from a governmental agency that also has like a timestamp for how long they can stay with you. And so there was this general sort of worry and consciousness that we might be losing a lot of really good ideas. Sometimes it can take 7-10 years to really create a good product before you're even ready to sort of target your larger market. And so what we're trying to do is to fill that gap. And so we're a bunch of old researchers. I have myself left mathematics, as they say, which means that I haven't done research for 10 years. But I've been sort of meddling with academics anyway, and doing some research on my own free time. But I think it's sort of the philosophy that we have is that since we're researchers ourselves and we have various backgrounds in the team, we're able to understand the kind of science, at least to the level that we know that, okay, physics isn't going to start contradicting you, or oops, biology actually doesn't work like that, which also means that we can sometimes take more risk than others might be willing to. And so we're really hoping to create like this FOMO, where other people also might dare to invest in a little bit more risk, but probably more impactful innovation that comes from our excellent researchers in Sweden.
Great perspective. Now, it was actually my fault. I'm seeing the questions now, or at least we have one question. One to Sala and to Mark. How dependent are VCs on the right government policy and regulations to create demand in markets for climate solutions? What should governments do to foster this innovation?
Yeah, climate in particular, as we were talking about, doesn't have any one buyer. And so since everybody benefits from it, the government kind of has to step in as the main buyer. And that can be with incentives. It can also be with disincentives. So again, back to like electric vehicles, I think this is an area where you can see the effect of government policy, pro and con, against adoption of those vehicles. So the German government tried for a long time to get clean diesel, which everybody in the industry always knew was fake, to be on par with electric vehicles. Not because it was technically or environmentally better, but because that's what their industry had. And I mean, I'm not calling out that country alone. There's lots and lots of examples of the governments having their own conflicting constraints and incentives. So I think VCs need to, well, and do look at not just, okay, if the government is the only buyer, is this going to work out? They should have a portfolio where there are other things that company can address. And I mean, I've seen that same approach from the VC side in like military technologies. A lot of militaries will not buy something if there's only one supplier, or if it's only a military application. So spreading that risk is a good logical strategy for VCs too.
Nice. Yeah, no, I agree. And I was thinking about what Mark was saying about sort of your model might have many different purposes. So I think having that in mind as well, like I don't like AI for X solutions that are trying to solve everything with their favorite model. But I do think that quite often, if you're trying to solve a climate change problem, for instance, you might end up solving something else as well. I have a favorite example in mind as well. There's a company, I think it was started by some Dutch people, that they started to look into satellite imagery of forestry. And their first aim was to help farmers in sort of in rural areas to get the Rainbow Alliance certification. And then they realized, okay, we actually need to get some money for this. So they partnered with very large forestry companies and started selling that as a service to them, because they were able to sort of qualify and quantify the value of forests in no matter where on the globe. And so if you're a large forestry company, that might actually be very valuable for you, because you might really need that information. So I really like that they started out with something that they were intending for good purpose. And then they realized, okay, so we can actually make this a valid business model as well by sort of sticking it to the man and helping helping the rural areas to stay competitive. Yeah.
There can be, of course, unintended, accidental, positive developments, not just negative ones that we touched on before. Anything else that we have from your perspective, Victor, that you would like to highlight during this conversation?
Ooh, that's I mean, there's so many. I think, from my point of view, some of the influence of big tech companies in this domain, I find intriguing and interesting, and how we
in what
deal with that. I mean, if we talk about the Googles and the Bezos funds, etc., and how they drive research in this space, and how do we create something that is able to match those capacities or collaborate with them in a way that really drives climate action. That to me is one of the things that I think about and that we need to be more explicit about. I think
it's a delicate balance, is what you're saying.
Certainly. Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah. And do we have a solution for it? Like, do you have a hinge of sort of an idea of, or great examples of how it can be done in a good way? No.
I mean, I think in general, for people working in this space, it is an ethical challenge that we're facing. How to find that proper balance between independence, making sure that we are critical to what's happening, at the same time as we get access to the best data, the best models, the best computing and expertise. And I think that to us is highly, highly difficult, especially in a context where governments are not stepping up to fund this type of research.
Yeah. We have one of those questions as well, a very broad question, and it's not addressed to anybody specific in the panel, but do you have any thoughts on how to support non-commercial solutions all the way to implementation? I guess the government is, as we've seen here, one early stage part of that, but how do we actually support these projects all the way? Is it even possible? Yeah.
Well, I would like to sort of really zoom out a little bit, because I think there's a real risk of projectification that we just
means
we do projects and then they fizzle out, or we do the next one, but we don't really learn. I think I have a dream that, the public sector can be a forward looking, proactive partner that sort of looks at, what is the market looking like, and where do we have market failures? Where should we bridge over? What can we do? That they build the capacity, that they kind of, use their public procurement in the best way possible, not just the innovation funding, but really where the core issues lie, to see, what is available out there and how can we incorporate it. There is too much fear, and there's too much kind of silo working and not enough leadership. And, here, the public sector has a really important role. I mean, it's great that, private investors are taking their responsibility, but I think it's not enough. We need a really proactive public sector in this.
I mean, I think it's impossible to say, because path to market or implementation is so different for different substrate technologies. So I remember, I was doing biomedical research, and people would talk about things that are around longevity or Alzheimer's. Those take decades to know whether they work or not. So it's really hard for a venture investor to fund something like that, because they have to close their fund after 10 years. So that's not a good vehicle for that, even though it's a potentially life-saving drug and things like that. Other things, like a lot of the stuff we've talked about today, is a behavioral change. And seeing it to implementation is like, we don't do that very well as humans. Like, we don't incentivize even self-serving behaviors very well, like health and eating well and stuff like that. So we worked with a drug company on how can we basically help children and teens who are getting obese prevent obesity and prediabetes and then diabetes. And that type of behavioral change, like, it changes actually faster than climate. Your data about what Gen Z did doesn't help you with millennials, doesn't help you with the next generation. So it's a moving target. I think that you have to take it case by case.
Oh yeah. I will have to repeat it afterwards so that people online hear it. Wait, we actually have a hand mic. It's better that way? Sorry. Sounds like you have an interesting story, so.
Anders Wijkman. I used to be a member of the European Parliament. And I wanted to make a comment to your comment about the public sector and the role of the public sector. We made a survey in the European Parliament in 2006. There were at that time 762 members. And we asked ourselves, how many have a science background? Can you guess?
5%.
1%. 7 out of 762. So I would submit that one of the problems in an area like this with complex technology development is that most decision makers don't understand. And of course, we have government agencies who are supposed to take a lead and help advise. But at the end of the day, it's policymakers who make the decisions, who allocate budgets, etc. And my fear is that technology is running so far ahead, and not only in this area, that we will always lag behind with the right kind of policies. So we should move this seminar into the Swedish Parliament.
Yes, we definitely should.
I also have another question, which is around effectiveness and efficiency. There is something called the Jevons paradox. It was an English economist in the 19th century. Coal technology was becoming more and more efficient. And then people all around said, no, we need less coal in the future. And he said, no, you will use more coal. Because when you make a system more productive, you free up resources, and there will be a demand for coal in other areas. And what we have seen over the last 50 years, there is no decoupling whatsoever taking place between economic growth and the need for natural resources. There is no decoupling. And we can't just continue increase the use of natural resources. So how the hell do we cope with this? And how can AI help?
Great question.
Big question.
So it's a behavioral crisis, not just a climate crisis. And how do we solve that? We actually were 1 minute past.
Oh dear. Let's do it in the pause.
Yeah. Well, do we have a quick answer?
Well, I think we need a new economic paradigm. So, we need to go from growth, economic growth at all cost, to a more balanced view. So like donut economics or whatever that framework is going to look like. But it needs to be within the planetary boundaries. And we're not there because no country at the macro level wants to be disinvited from the G7 because the growth is too low. We all want to, buy that new car so the neighbors see that we're doing well. So there's something here that we need to address, definitely.
So in short, yeah. It all comes down to the right incentives as well, because without them, there won't be a new sort of economic, financial paradigm either. We haven't really solved that problem, but it's a start. Leadership, of course, is super important too. The UK just announced, because they want to be AI leaders, that they're going to invest billions in AI and also educate politicians. I read that and I was so envious. They're actually going to have politicians who understand at least a little bit about AI. So where does that leave us in Sweden? I don't know, but thank you so much for joining us here, all four. A round of applause. And that's it. Thank you for joining us virtually as well. And thank you.